Hey, and welcome back to another UFC video, and in this video, I will give you my updated top 15 UFC fighters of all time. My list will be firstly based on resume, like who you beat, when you beat them, and how you beat them. Then we have how dominant you was, and your win streak. By dominant, I also mean how you made your opponents feel in the octagon, and also just in general, how you dominated your own division. Then my last criteria will be how many title defenses you have and your record in the UFC. So let's get straight into the 15th spot where I have Francis. The reason why I have picked Francis over Stipe is because I don't value Stipe winning against a 40+ DC that much, and I think Francis beat the better opponents, was more dominant, and had a better record. Francis literally brutally knocked Stipe out, and have names like Gain, Blades, Overeem, Rosenstrike, and so on. And he has only 2 losses compared to Stipe's 5 losses. Now let's move on to my 14th spot, where I have Max Holloway, who I think is the 3rd greatest featherweight of all time, following his loss to Ilia. Max was on a 13-win streak until he was beat by Dustin, so he was dominant for a long time, and he also beat the previous featherweight GOAT Aldo in that win streak he was on. He overall has a great resume, an amazing win streak, but he has many losses to be above the next fighters I have on my list, and he was also beaten by fighters who were legit like Volk 3 times, Ilia, Connor, and Dustin 2 times. He literally have 8 losses inside the UFC, which is too much to be anywhere higher. If he didn't lose to Ilia, then yeah, I would have had him higher. But that's not the case here. Let's get to the 13th spot where I have Izzy. I know a lot of you will say how and why, but he do have a great resume, who consists of Alex Whitaker 2 times, Costa Silva, Romero, and Vettori 2 times. He also have 5 title defenses, which is a lot, and have been champ 2 times at middleweight, avenging his loss to Alex by a brutal knockout. Just look at how dominant Alex has been. Izzy is the only guy who have beat and knocked Alex out in the UFC. He was also on a 9-win streak, until he moved up to light heavyweight, where he lost to Yan, but then he went down, went on a 3 more winning streak until he lost to Alex. So in my opinion, he does deserve a spot in the GOAT lost, and the only reason why I can't have him higher up is because he has 4 losses in the UFC, and 2 of them is to Strickland and Dricus, who I don't consider as top elite fighters. And if you want to be high on a GOAT list, you can't lose to fighters like this. The Dricus loss is pretty acceptable, but the Strickland loss hurts a lot. But let's see if Izzy can beat Imanov and then fight the loser of Dricus and Strickland, because that would help his GOAT status. For my 12th spot, I have the current featherweight champion Ilia Topuria. I know some of you might say it's too soon, but let's be real. Who beats and knocks out the 2 greatest fighters of all time in your division, back-to-back easily? That enough should enter him in these conversations. But he is also undefeated, and very dominant. Resume is on a great start, but he just need to beat more people to be able to be higher on the GOAT list. If he beats Volk in the rematch, which I think is his next fight, then I will have him at my 11th spot. But for right now, I keep him at 12th. Also, I'm worried about if he can win his next fights after the Volk rematch, which are looking to be either against Movasar if he decides to stay at featherweight, or against Islam if he moves up. Even Charles is a tough fight. And for my 11th spot, I have went with Henry Cejudo. I wouldn't mind switching his place with Ilia, but let's wait until Ilia beats Volk again for that, because Cejudo is a double champ, which means a lot, and has a better resume than Ilia still. Cejudo literally beat DJ, TJ, and Cruz, who all are all-timer as well. But Cejudo's only problem is that he retired at his prime, which led to him missing out on title defenses and resume. He has also lost 4 times in the UFC, and he is not the most dominant champion we have seen. For my 10th spot, I have the new bantamweight GOAT Merab. I think it's time to include him in these conversations following his win over Umar. Even before that, he was close to being in the top 10, but this win solidified it for him. He has literally dominated his division by beating former champions in dominant fashion like Jan, Sean, and Cejudo. And now with another win in Umar, who will age like wine since Umar will definitely become champ in this division by next year. Let's see if they fight again, because Umar will go out there and beat everyone in front of him to earn himself another title shot. Merab do need more defenses to move up even higher on the GOAT list, but for right now I think number 10 is very good, because he already has the resume, dominance, and win streak, only lacks defenses and finishes. Then for my number 9th spot, I have the current light heavyweight champ, who is on a 5-win streak and was on a 4-winning streak, before losing to Izzy. But yeah, Alex is my number 9 over Merab for 2 reasons. More defenses, and 2-weight champion. Merab do have the better resume obviously, but he still needs a few more defenses to be above Alex in my opinion, which will most likely happen since Alex is going against Ankalaev, who I think he will lose to, and will hurt his GOAT status. So, you could put Merab over him, because of the better resume, and much longer win streak. But, I still want to give Alex props for coming in so late to the sport, and being dominant by beating several former champs, and great fighters by dominant fashion. And also becoming a 2-weight champion, which many fighters can't do, despite being great. Next up on my list, coming in at my 8th spot, is Kamaru Usman. First of all, he was very dominant, going on a 15-winning streak before losing to Leon by a fluke knockout which ruined his GOAT status run. But Usman did lap his division, and did it pretty easily. He was also the pound-for-pound king until he lost to Leon, and have 5 title defenses. But since then, he has been on a 3 losing streak, losing twice, to Leon and Khamzat. Nonetheless, Usman deserved number 8, and should have had won that fight against Leon to tie Silva for the longest win streak in the UFC of all time, and also that extra title defense. Then at number 7 I have Volk. In my opinion, he still belongs here, and is still the greatest featherweight of all time. But if he loses to Ilia again, then we might have some uncomfortable conversations about his placement in the GOAT list, because then Ilia has not only beaten the greatest featherweight of all time once, but twice, and also beaten the second greatest featherweight in Max. Also losing 2 times against Islam and Ilia would not be a good look for your GOAT status. But let's talk about what he done. He has beaten Max 3 times, Ortega, Yair, and Aldo, which is a good resume. He was also on a 12-win streak until he lost to Islam. He also have 5 title defenses, and have been the most dominant featherweight of all time. He has only lost to Islam and Ilia in the UFC, and both of them are the current 2 best fighters in the world. And for my 6th spot, I have the flyweight GOAT of all time, DJ. Probably the most skilled fighter we've seen in the UFC, I think Islam is, but still. Complete fighter who can do everything. Has the second most title defenses of 11. Only problem with DJ is that he did lose 4 times in the UFC and his resume is not the best. But he still did what he had to do, and was dominant. One thing he will forever be is the best flyweight of all time, and to be able to pass him requires better resume, more dominant, and a lot of defenses, also not so many losses. I know some of y'all might have DJ in your top 5, but for me he just fall a bit short. But you could switch him with my number 5 spot. But I want to keep it like this. Now into the top 5. At 5th place, I have Fat Guy DC. In my opinion, he's one of the most underrated GOATs of the sport. He has beaten fighters like Stipe, Alex Gus, Rumble, Silva, and so on. But that's not the impressive part. He went head-to-head with Jon Jones, who was much younger than him, and DC was at the end of his career when he lost twice to Stipe. He was a double champ, and he defended both belts, which puts him in a special place already. You also have to keep in mind that he got into the UFC very late, which is even more impressive. So to do what he did, way crazy, especially when everyone was so much taller than him. If it weren't for Jones, then DC would have racked up even more defenses and would have been champ for longer. But he still has 3 title defenses, and went on a 12-winning streak until he lost to Jones, and then he went straight back to a 7-winning streak until he lost to Stipe. So if he hadn't lost to Jones and beaten him, he would have been on a 20-winning streak, which is unbelievable. But nonetheless, he's my 5th best fighter of all time. Moving on to my 4th spot, I have the great GSP. The only reason why I don't have him higher up is because I believe the other fighters I have above him has beaten way better fighters and has been more dominant. And also GSP have lost more, even though he did avenge his losses. But yeah, GSP is one of the most complete fighters the sport has seen, and he was dominant, but not as dominant as he should have been. He did have fights where it was close, or he lost, and even bled. He could have had a 28-winning streak if it weren't for his stupid losses. But nonetheless, he went first on a 7-win streak, and lost, then he got back on a 6-winning streak, and lost again. But then he ended his career on a 13-win streak, beating fighters like BJ, Bisping, Hendricks, Matt Serra, Matt Hughes, and Nick Diaz. It is a pretty good resume, but maybe not compared to the resume some fighters have today. But as mentioned, he went on multiple winning streaks, and only lost 2 times in the UFC with a record of 26 wins and 2 losses. Not to mention his 11 title defenses and a double champ. This should be enough to be considered the GOAT of the sport. That's why I wouldn't be mad if you have him at your number 1. Now into my 3rd spot. I have the current pound-for-pound king Islam Makhachev. In my opinion, the greatest lightweight of all time. But not the best, because he ain't as dominant as Khabib. But the reason why I have him above GSP is because Islam is currently on a 15-win streak, and only 1 win away to tie the record which Silva holds of a 16-win streak. I believe Islam will continue to win, and break that record, and also rack up some more defenses, which would put him over GSP comfortably. But I'm willing to put him above him already, because he has beaten better competition in dominant fashion. He ended both Charles and Volk win streak of 11 and 12, and also Moicano's 6-win streak. He beat all these fighters by decision. And not only that, he has finished his last 8 opponents out of 9 consisting of Moicano, Dustin, Volk, Charles, Green, Hooker, Moises, and Dober, which is a crazy stat. He did also beat Arman earlier in his career very comfortably, and would beat him again if they fight. I can't see anyone beating him currently, especially at lightweight, and I also don't see any welterweight beating him either. I hope we can see him collecting that 2nd belt, because in my opinion, if he wins 2 more times, and maybe gets that double champ status, then he is the greatest of all time, even above Jones. He could also possibly add a really good value name to his resume in Ilia, which would be very good if they fight. But nonetheless, he has a record of 16 wins, and 1 fluke loss in his 2nd UFC fight, which I don't hold accountable so much. He's the most complete fighter of all time inside the UFC, and one of the most dominant fighters we have seen. For my 2nd spot, I have Khabib, the only fighter who managed to retire undefeated while being pound-for-pound king, and also in his prime. We all know he would have mauled fighters like Volk, Charles, Arman, Ilia, and every single welterweight if he didn't retire. He literally never lost a round and never bled in a sport where you beat people up. Even Islam, who's the current best fighter in the world, have fights where he gets beat up or bleeds, and he is currently the most dominant fighter alongside Khamzat and Tom Aspinall. So imagine how good Khabib was, considering he never managed to bleed or even beat up. We always talk about how crazy Merab's gas tank is and how he dominates his opponents, but Merab can't even hold people down to maul them or even put damage on them. Khabib stuck to the same fighting style and game plan, and no could stop him even though they knew what he would do. That's how dominant he was. Islam has very good striking and still struggles sometimes. Khabib didn't even have that good of a striking, except being good defensively on the feet, and yet no one hurt him. It's clear that he would have mauled everyone if he continued, but unfortunately his father passing away, he had to retire to fulfill his dream to make Islam and his cousins champions, which he did with Islam and Usman and soon with Umar as well. I could have easily put him at my number 1 spot, but the reason why I didn't do that is because he lacks better resume. His resume is good, but it could have been 10 times better if he didn't retire. So therefore I will have him at my number 2 spot. And yeah, it's true that Islam has passed his legacy, but that doesn't make him better. It makes him greater if you understand. And finally, for my number 1 spot, go to UFC. I have Jon Jones, not really a surprise still, even though his history of ducking real competition and usage of PED and steroids. But yeah, Jones is one of the most completed fighters who can do everything. His only weakness is tall, fast complete fighters who have good hands with power like Francis and Tom, who would have probably beat him. We have seen Jones struggle in there against fighters like Gus, Reyes, who he lost to, and Santos, but he has an almost a perfect record. Only one loss, who was Reyes, but despite that, he is still the GOAT, just because of his dominance for many years, where he have fought 2 generations of fighters and also have managed to be a 2-weight champion. And he also have the most title defenses of all time, so he has everything to be considered the GOAT. Oh yeah, also his resume. The only guy who can take his number 1 spot is Islam, as I mentioned before, if he manages to win 2 more fights or get that second belt. Because they are even on resume, I would even say Islam might have the better resume, but it's very close. But as far as title defenses, we will most likely never see anyone take that from him. The only Jon can solidify his number 1 spot even more is to fight Tom and beat him. That would help him a lot. But I guess we have to wait and find out if he will take the fight or not. So yeah, this is my list. Let me know if you agree, or what you don't agree with. And also drop your GOAT list in the comments, it would be fun to see. This is it for this video, and see you in the next one.